My father-in-law left me his house instead of his biological son, so my husband tried to forge a will. When Frank died, I expected his son, David, my husband of 8 years, to inherit everything. Frank had always been cold to me, barely acknowledging my existence at family dinners. He gave hoarse answers to my questions and never once thanked me for the casseroles I brought home. So imagine my shock when a lawyer called on Tuesday morning while I was folding laundry. "Mrs. Morrison, your father-in-law left you the family estate on Maple Drive, including all its contents and financial assets." I dropped the phone. The estate was worth more than $2 million, a sprawling Victorian home with 12 rooms, antique furniture, and Frank's collection of classic cars. David was in the kitchen when I told him, stirring sugar into his coffee, as he had done every morning for 8 years. His routine was sacrosanct. 2 cups, 3 sugar cubes, never cream. "That's impossible," he said, his face white. The coffee mug slipped from his hands and smashed on the tile floor. "Daddy would never leave you anything. He barely tolerated you." "The reading is tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I said, still processing my own shock. That night, David paced our bedroom like a caged animal. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he was drugged. Maybe someone had influenced him. "David, your father was sane to the end, but sane enough to deceive his only son." The next day, we sat in Mr. Henderson's mahogany office. David's hands shook as the lawyer read the will with deliberate precision. "To my daughter-in-law, Sarah Morrison, who has shown me more sincere kindness in 8 years than my own son has shown me in 35. I leave my home, 1247 Maple Drive, and all its contents, including my investment portfolio valued at $1,200,000. David jumped out of his chair as if he had been electrocuted. "This is wrong. My father was ill, confused. Sarah manipulated him during these visits." Mr. Henderson calmly adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your father came to see me 6 months ago, Mr. Morrison. He was perfectly sane and very clear about his intentions." "But why?" David demanded, turning to me, his eyes wild. "What did you do to him?" I thought about all the Tuesdays I'd spent with Frank after his stroke, helping him shower when David claimed he was too busy with work, reading him detective novels when David said hospitals embarrassed him, sitting through his chemotherapy when David couldn't stand the sight of his father so weak. "I was just visiting," I said quietly. David's face twisted in pure fury. "We're going to contest this. No way." "Actually," Mr. Henderson interrupted, "there's something else your father left." He pulled out a sealed envelope. "A letter? He suspected you might contest the will." David went completely white. "What letter?" The lawyer's expression darkened as he scanned the contents. "The one that explains in detail why he chose your wife over his own son." David grabbed my arm so hard I groaned, his fingers digging into my flesh. "We're leaving right now." In the car, David said nothing until we stopped at a red light on Main Street. Then he turned to me with eyes I'd never seen before, cold and calculating. "You're signing that house over to me tomorrow." "David, I don't think so. Or I'll make sure you never see a cent of this. I'll drag you through court for years." That night, I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to find David hunched over his laptop in the dark. On the screen was a PDF of Frank's will, with David's name carefully written in place of mine. I stood frozen in the doorway of our home office, watching my husband forge his father's will for 8 years. The blue glow of the laptop illuminated David's face as he painstakingly changed every reference to Sarah Elizabeth Morrison to David James Morrison. His tongue lolled slightly in concentration, the same expression he wore when he was cashing our check or assembling IKEA furniture. "What are you doing?" I whispered into the darkness. He turned around so quickly that the office chair nearly toppled over, slamming the laptop shut with a sharp crack. "Nothing. Go back to bed, Sarah." But I'd seen enough. My hands shook as I backed toward the hallway, my bare feet making no noise on the wooden floor. "David, this is illegal. You could go to jail for counterfeiting." He stood slowly, straightening his 6-foot frame, and for the first time in 8 years of marriage, I was actually afraid of him. The man who had cried during our wedding vows, who had brought me soup when I had the flu, who had sustained me through 3 miscarriages. That man was gone. In his place stood someone I didn't recognize. "No one is going to jail," he said in his eerily calm voice. "You keep your mouth shut, and we'll serve this revised version to Henderson tomorrow morning." "A revised version?" I stared at him in disbelief. "David, this is fraud." This is a serious crime. This is justice, he snapped, his mask slipping for a moment. I'm his son. I'm his blood. I deserve this house, not some woman who showed up 8 years ago and played Nurse May to get into his will. The cruelty in his voice hit me like a physical blow. This was the man who had promised to love and protect me in sickness and in health, who had held me as I cried over my own father's sudden heart attack 2 years ago, who had convinced me that his family's coldness toward me didn't matter because we had each other. Your father was crystal clear about what he wanted, I said, trying to sound level. David laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a bitter resentment that seemed to have been building for decades. My father was a senile old man whom you systematically manipulated, those precious Tuesday visits. I know exactly what you did. Whispered poison in his ear, turned him against his own son, made yourself indispensable so he would remember you in his will. I took care of him because you didn't want to, I countered. I had a job. I had real responsibilities. I couldn't just drop everything to play nursemaid like some unemployed housewife. The accusation stung because there was some truth to it. I quit my teaching job 3 years ago when David convinced me we didn't need 2 incomes, that he wanted to take care of me. Now I realized it was about control, not love. He was dying, David. He needed his family. David's face twisted with years of repressed rage. Don't you dare lecture me about family. You have no idea what it was like growing up with that man, the constant criticism, the impossible standards, how I was never good enough at anything. A's weren't enough. Making the team wasn't enough. Getting into law school wasn't enough. He always found something wrong, something to nitpick. So you left him when he needed you most. I protected myself from his toxicity, something you wouldn't understand with your perfect little family where everyone actually loved each other. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had always envied my close relationship with my parents, making sarcastic comments about how some people had it easy. Yet he couldn't understand why his father would choose someone who had actually been kind to him. I turned to leave, planning to grab my phone and call Mr. Henderson immediately. But David's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with bruising force. Where do you think you're going? To call a lawyer and tell him what you're doing. His grip tightened until I groaned in pain, his fingers clamping around my bones like a vice. You're not calling anyone. We'll figure this out together tomorrow. You're going to smile and apologize for the mix-up. Explain that you were emotional and misunderstood Frank's intentions, and we'll file a real will. Let me go, David. Promise me first, Sarah. Promise you won't say anything. I'm not promising anything. This is crazy. He twisted my wrist until tears welled up my face, pain shooting up my arm. Promise me, or I'll make your life a living hell. I'll still contest the will and drag you through the courts for years. I'll tell everyone you seduced my dying father for his money. I'll hire investigators to dig up every incriminating detail about your past. I'll make sure you never see a penny of that inheritance. No one would believe it, I said. But doubt was starting to creep in. Really? A young wife who conveniently shows up every Tuesday when a vulnerable old man is alone and confused? Who suddenly inherits everything while his devoted son gets nothing? How do you think that will look to a jury? Especially when I tell them about all the times you encouraged him to change his medications, all those private conversations behind closed doors. I looked at him, realizing with crystal clarity that I was married to a complete stranger. 8 years, and I had never really known this man. That's not you, David. That's not who you are. That's exactly who I am, he said coldly. You just never bothered to pay attention. You were too busy playing the perfect wife, weren't you? He finally let go of my wrist, leaving angry red marks that were already starting to turn into bruises. We'll go to Henderson's office at 1:30 tomorrow. Wear something decent. That blue dress I bought you for your birthday. Look respectable. And Sarah, his smile was icy. If you ever think about betraying me, remember that I know where you sleep every night. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Betray me in this, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I locked myself in our guest bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, my mind racing. 8 years of marriage, and I'd never seen this side of him. The calculated manipulation, the casual threats, the willingness to use physical force. How did I miss all these signs? But when I replayed our entire relationship with new eyes, the red flags were there from the start. The way he gradually isolated me from my college friends, claiming they were jealous of our happiness and didn't understand our relationship. The way he convinced me to quit my teaching job by telling me he made enough money and wanted to take care of me, but in reality, he was robbing me of my financial independence. The subtle criticism disguised as loving concern. The way he made me feel guilty for wanting to visit my parents, claiming I was choosing them over him. I mistook control for protectiveness, possessiveness for love. At 3:17 a.m., I crept out of the bathroom as quietly as I could. David was snoring loudly in our bedroom, his laptop closed on his nightstand, evidence waiting to be destroyed. I tiptoed into the kitchen and called the one person I trusted completely. "Sarah, my God, it's 3 in the morning," my sister Emma answered, her voice heavy with sleep. "What happened?" "I need help," I whispered, then explained everything. Frank's will, the inheritance, David's forgery, his threats. "Pack a bag and get out of there right now," Emma said without hesitation. All sleepiness had vanished. "Come to my place. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "I can't leave. If I disappear tonight, he'll know I'm planning to expose him. It'll give him time to cover his tracks, maybe even destroy the evidence." "Then what's your plan?" I glanced toward our bedroom, where my husband was sleeping, probably dreaming of his $2 million inheritance. "I'm going to beat him." The next morning, David was unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming as he made himself coffee with the same exact ritual. 2 cups, 3 sugars, never cream. He even made me scrambled eggs, something he hadn't done in months. "Ready for our meeting with Henderson?" he asked, kissing my forehead as if nothing had happened the night before. I managed what I thought was a convincing smile. "Actually, about that, I've been thinking all night and I think you're right. Frank has been ill for the last few months. The medications were affecting his judgment. He didn't really know what he was doing." David's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "Really? You mean that? I don't deserve this house or his money. You're his son, his blood. This should go to the family." "I'll tell Mr. Henderson there was a misunderstanding, that I was too emotional to think clearly yesterday." "That's my girl," he said, hugging me tightly. "I knew you'd see reason once you calmed down. You've always been so logical, so fair. That's one of the things I love most about you." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed he meant it. At 1:30 sharp, we walked into Henderson's office together. I was wearing the blue dress David had asked for, and he had his hand on the small of my back possessively. Mr. Henderson looked genuinely surprised to see us so soon. "How can I help you today?" "There's been a terrible mistake," I said, letting my voice shake. Not with fear this time, but with anticipation of what was to come. "About Frank's will." "What mistake, Mrs. Morrison?" David leaned forward eagerly, practically bouncing in his chair. "My wife thinks she may have misunderstood my father's intentions yesterday. She was emotional, grief-stricken. The house should obviously go to his son, his real family." Mr. Henderson frowned, his weathered face creased with confusion. "Mrs. Morrison, your father-in-law was extremely specific in his wishes. He came to see me several times over the course of 6 months to make sure everything was legally sound. There was absolutely no misunderstanding." "But of course," David interrupted, "if Sarah doesn't want the house and is willing to sign it over." "Actually," I said, calmly pulling out my phone, "before we discuss anything, I think you should see something." I had spent the morning figuring out how to extract and edit the footage from our home security cameras, the same cameras David had insisted on installing throughout the house as protection after a spate of break-ins in our neighborhood. The irony was delicious. I played back crystal-clear footage of David on his laptop at 2:17 a.m., methodically changing every mention of my name to his in the will document. The blood ran from David's face so quickly I thought he might faint. That's not what it looks like," he muttered, his confident demeanor crumbling. "Really?" Mr. Henderson leaned forward, studying the screen of his phone. "Because it looks exactly as if you're systematically altering a legal document, which, as you know, is a felony." I was confused, emotional about the loss of my father. I wasn't thinking clearly. I never intended to file anything. "Clearly enough to change every mention of your wife's name to yours," the lawyer said dryly. "That involves a fair amount of deliberate thought and planning." David turned to me, his eyes desperate, his mask finally slipping completely. "You recorded me, your own husband. How could you betray me like that?" How could I betray you? I stared at him in amazement. You threatened me, physically hurt me, and tried to steal your father's final wishes. My husband would never do any of that. Sarah, please. I was upset. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't mean any of it. You know I would never do you any real harm. I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the dark purple bruises on my wrist from where he'd grabbed me. You've already hurt me. Mr. Henderson was already reaching for his phone. Mr. Morrison, I hope you realize that forging a will is a serious felony. I'm legally obligated to report this to the authorities. Wait! David's voice was thick with panic. You can't do this. Sarah, tell him it was just a misunderstanding. Tell him I was grieving and I made a stupid mistake. Like your father's will was a stupid mistake? I asked calmly. Please, David begged, kneeling next to my chair. I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling, anger management, whatever you want. I'll never touch you again. Just don't let them arrest me. You should have thought of that before you decided to commit fraud. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to live? You're taking everything from me. I'm not taking anything. Your father gave me what he wanted me to have. You're the one who tried to steal it. As the police arrived to take David's statement and gather evidence, I thought of Frank's letter, the one Mr. Henderson had mentioned but never read in full. I asked to see it while David was being questioned in the next room. To my dear Sarah, it began in Frank's distinctive, shaky handwriting. If you are reading this, then David has shown his true colors and contested my will. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I've watched my son all his life, hoping he would change, praying he would develop some empathy or gratitude, but some people never learn to see beyond their own wants and needs. You have shown me more genuine kindness in the last 2 years of my life than David has shown in 35. When I had my stroke, he visited me exactly 3 times in 6 months. When I started chemotherapy, he didn't have time to drive me to that one meeting. When I lay in that hospital bed, scared and alone, thinking I was going to die, you were the one who sat with me. You read me those ridiculous detective novels I loved. You brought me real food when the hospital gruel was inedible. You held my hand when the pain was unbearable. David couldn't even look at me in those last months. I disgusted him, reminded him of his own mortality. But you saw me as someone worth caring about. Not because you wanted anything from me, but because it was the right thing to do. I know David will claim that you manipulated me, that you turned me against him. The truth is, he turned me against him years ago with his selfishness and indifference. You are the daughter I never had, and I trust you to use my home to build the family you deserve, whether it is with David, if he can change, or with someone who truly appreciates your worth. Don't let my son's bitterness poison the gift I give you. You deserve every cent with your kindness and compassion. Be happy, Sarah, and know that someone finally sees your true worth with love and gratitude. Frank Morrison, P.S. If David is reading this over your shoulder, know that I am not senile. I am not confused or manipulated. I am finally doing what I should have done years ago by rewarding genuine love over biological obligation. Tears blurred my eyes as I read it twice, then carefully folded the letter and put it in my purse. But Frank's surprises weren't over. 2 days later, Mr. Henderson called me into his office again. There's one more thing your father-in-law left behind, he said, producing a small wooden box. He insisted that I wait until all the complications were ironed out. Inside the box was a key and another letter. Sarah, this key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank. Inside you'll find additional items I wanted you to have. My mother's jewelry, old photographs, and one more surprise. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, is expecting you. I've also arranged to have the property taxes on the house paid out of a separate account for the next 10 years. I know David might try to make things difficult for you financially, so I wanted to make sure you could keep the house no matter what happened. You'll never have to worry about losing your home, Frank. At the bank, Mrs. Chen ceremoniously led me to a safe deposit box. Inside, along with beautiful vintage jewelry and family photos dating back to the 1940s, was the deed to a small house in the mountains, Frank's secret hideaway, which even David didn't know about. Mr. Morrison bought the property 15 years ago, Mrs. Chen explained. He used to go there to fish and think. He said it was the only place he'd ever felt truly at peace. There was also a bank statement showing a bank account for $200,000. Money Frank had quietly saved for years from his pension and Social Security. On the note was written, for emergencies or whatever brings you happiness. You have given me more happiness in 2 years than I had in the last 30. Use it to live the life you deserve." I went to the cabin for the weekend. It was a small, rustic place with a stone fireplace and windows overlooking a pristine lake. Frank had left it fully furnished, bookshelves full of detective novels and a tackle box ready for fishing. On the kitchen table was one last note. "Welcome to your sanctuary. I hope you find as much peace here as I have." The neighbors, Bill and Margaret Thompson, were looking after the house. They were nice people who knew about my gift to you and were looking forward to seeing you. There's a garden bed out back where Margaret says the tomatoes grow especially well. I think you'll like it. Love, Frank. 3 weeks later, I served David with divorce papers. He was living in his cousin's cramped apartment across town, calling me 15 times a day with increasingly desperate apologies and promises to change. But I had finally learned the difference between manipulation and genuine remorse. The divorce went surprisingly smoothly. Since Frank's inheritance was clearly intended for me alone, and we had separate bank accounts, David had no claim on anything other than his personal belongings and half the value of our modest home, which we would have had to sell anyway since I couldn't afford the mortgage on my own. David's lawyer tried to argue that Frank's gifts were marital property, but Mr. Henderson had covered that too. Every document made it clear that the inheritance was intended for Sarah Morrison personally, and not as part of any marital property. During the proceedings, I learned more about David's relationship with his father. Frank had repeatedly tried to mend the relationship between them. He offered to pay for family therapy, took David fishing, even offered to help David start his own law practice. David rejected each offer, claiming his father was trying to control him. The truth is, David's cousin testified that David was always jealous of anyone who got Frank's attention. Even as a child, if Frank complimented another family member or spent time with someone else, David would sulk for days. The final blow came when David's therapist, who had been forced by the court to submit a report, said David had significant narcissistic tendencies and difficulty accepting responsibility for his actions. The therapist recommended more therapy and anger management classes. 6 months later, as I sat in Frank's beautiful garden, now my garden, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A genuine peace. I had planted the vegetable garden Frank had always wanted, but never had the energy to tend. Tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, herbs. The whole backyard smelled of fresh earth and growing plants. Emma visited me every weekend, bringing her 2 children to play in the spacious yard. "Frank would have loved to see this," she said one Saturday, watching her 5-year-old chase butterflies through the flower beds. "He really loved it," I replied, pulling the dead flowers off the roses. That's why he made sure it was kept tended. I also began volunteering at a local hospice, reading to patients and helping families get through the difficult final months. Frank's letter gave me a new perspective on what was really important. Not money or an inheritance, but the simple act of supporting people when they needed it most. The work was emotionally challenging, but deeply rewarding. I met families going through the same struggles I'd seen with Frank, and I could offer them practical advice as well as emotional support. How to talk to doctors, how to make difficult decisions, how to find moments of joy even in the darkest times. One patient, an older woman named Dorothy, reminded me so much of Frank, so I began bringing her the same detective novels I'd read to him. Her grandson, Marcus, was going through a painful divorce and rarely visited. Dorothy brightened when I came every Tuesday, the same day I visited Frank. "You remind me of my daughter," she told me one afternoon. "She died 10 years ago. Cancer. She would have loved you." When Dorothy died 6 months later, she left me a small inheritance, her collection of first-edition detective novels, and a letter thanking me for making her last months bearable when her own family had not. Marcus contested her will, claiming that I had manipulated his grandmother, just as David accused me of manipulating Frank. But the hospice staff testified to my regular visits and genuine concern for Dorothy. The judge ruled in my favor, noting that kindness is not manipulation, and those who confuse the two often reveal more about themselves than about the person they accuse. A year after Frank's death, I received a letter, forwarded through my attorney. David had been sentenced to 200 hours of community service and 2 years of probation for forging a will, but he had avoided prison time thanks to his previously spotless record and what the judge called genuine remorse. He had moved to Denver and started working at a nonprofit legal clinic, helping low-income families with their legal issues. "Sarah," the letter began, in David's familiar handwriting. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I don't ask for it. I just want you to know that therapy has helped me see things that you and my father both saw and that I was blind to for so long. My whole life, I thought I was entitled to things I never deserved. Love, respect, and inheritance, when you earned them all through basic human decency and consistent kindness. I was so focused on what I thought I was entitled to that I never saw what I was actually getting. Working here with families who have so little and give so much to each other has been sobering. Last week, I met a woman who reminded me of you. She cares for her husband with Alzheimer's, works 2 jobs, and raises her grandchildren, but still volunteers on Saturdays reading to children at the library. When I asked her why she does so much for others when her own life is so difficult, she said, "Because kindness costs nothing, but is worth everything." That's when I finally understood what my father meant when he called you the daughter he never had. You have something I never learned, but I'm trying to develop the ability to love people without expecting anything in return. You took care of him because he needed caring, not because you wanted anything from him. I hope that one day I can be the man you thought you married, even if it's too late for us. You deserved so much better than the person I was, and I am trying to be someone who can be worthy of the love you showed my dad. I hope you are doing well at home. Dad would be proud of what you are doing with him. I drive past it sometimes when I am in town to visit my cousin, and the sight of the blooming garden and the lights in the windows at night makes me smile. It looks like a home should be, warm, alive, and loved. With sincere regrets and hope for your happiness, David. P.S. I attend therapy twice a week and work with my sponsor on a program for people with control issues. I am learning to take responsibility for my actions instead of blaming others for my problems. It is hard work, but it is necessary. I read the letter twice, then put it down without responding. Some burned bridges don't need to be rebuilt, but I was glad to know that David was getting help and trying to change, even if it was too late for our marriage. Instead of dwelling on the past, I spent the day planting a memorial rose bush for Frank next to the wooden bench where we used to sit during those Tuesday visits. The roses were an old-fashioned variety that smelled like heaven, Frank's favorite, the kind his mother had grown in this same garden decades earlier. Sometimes I still sit on that bench in the evenings, watching the sunset and telling Frank about the renovations I was planning, or the book I was reading, or the new patients I was seeing at the hospice. I like to think he hears me, and I know he's proud that his final act of love couldn't be faked, stolen, or tainted by his son's greed. Only honored by those who understand that inheritance is not the ties of blood, but the family we choose to create through our actions. The house feels alive now, in a way it never did when Frank was fading and David was away. I've opened up rooms that had been closed for years, filled them with light and laughter when Emma's family visited, turned Frank's sterile office into a cozy reading nook where I can curl up with the detective novels I used to read to him. I've also discovered Frank's workshop in the basement, filled with woodworking tools and half-finished projects. He was building a rocking chair, presumably for the grandchildren he never had. I take woodworking classes to finish it, as well as the birdhouses and garden benches he started. Working with my hands in his space feels like a conversation across time. Every Tuesday, I still think of Frank. Not with sadness, but with gratitude for the unexpected gift he gave me. Not just financial security, but the knowledge that kindness is never wasted. Even when it seemed unnoticed, he saw it all, remembered it all, and in the end ensured that love triumphed over entitlement. Last month, I got a call from Dorothy's grandson Marcus, who was contesting her will. He called to apologize. "I found some letters my grandmother wrote but never sent," he said. "All about you, how much your visits meant to her, how you reminded her of her daughter. I was angry, and I was looking for someone to blame for my own guilt for not visiting her enough. I'm sorry I put you through this legal nightmare." "It's okay," I told him. "Grief makes people do things they wouldn't normally do." "She really loved you," he said, "and reading her letters, I can see why. You gave her what I couldn't, your time and attention, without expecting anything in return." These days, I split my time between the main house and Frank's cabin in the mountains. The neighbors, Bill and Margaret Thompson, became like adopted grandparents. Margaret taught me how to can vegetables from the garden, and Bill showed me the best fishing spots on the lake. They tell me stories of Frank's visits over the years, how at ease he seemed, how he said he wanted to share the place with someone who would appreciate it. He said he was waiting for the right person, Margaret told me one evening as we sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset. He said he'd know them when he found them. I guess he found you. I also began writing, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the confidence to try. There's something about the quiet of the mountains and the rhythm of the seasons that makes the words flow. I'm working on a book about caring for loved ones, about finding grace in difficult situations, about how the people we care about often give us more than we give them. It tells the story of Frank, Dorothy, and all the other patients I met in hospice who taught me that love isn't something you hoard or demand, but something you give freely and trust will come back to you in unexpected ways. The book proposal was accepted by a small publisher specializing in memoirs about family and healing. My editor says the title, Lessons in Love and Loss on a Tuesday Afternoon, captures the essence of the story perfectly. On the 2-year anniversary of Frank's death, I hosted a memorial service at the house. Emma and her family came along with Mr. Henderson, some of Frank's former neighbors, and some of the staff from the hospice where I volunteer. We planted a memorial garden with all of Frank's favorite flowers and shared stories of kindness and second chances. David didn't come, but he sent a wreath with a card that simply said, "Thank you for loving my dad the way he deserved. I hope someday I can learn to love like that too." It was the first admission he'd made. That love is a choice and a practice, not something you're born with. As the sun set that anniversary evening, I sat on Frank's bench, surrounded by the people who had become my chosen family. Emma's children played in the garden, Margaret and Bill shared stories, Mr. Henderson quietly read one of Frank's detective novels. This is exactly what Frank imagined when he left me his home. Not just a building, but a meeting place for love and laughter, and those ordinary moments that make life extraordinary. The house is now mine, legally and completely. But more importantly, it has become what Frank always hoped it would become, a place where kindness lives and grows, where people are valued for who they are, not for what they can provide, where every Tuesday afternoon is a reminder that love, freely given, always finds its way home. This is a legacy worth inheriting, worth protecting, and worth passing on to the next generation who will understand that the most valuable things in life cannot be faked, stolen, or demanded, only earned through the simple revolutionary act of supporting each other when it matters.